Hi, my name is Dr. David Rodriguez. I'm a professor of finance at Henderson State University, and in this quick video, I just want to go over the generic case rubric. This rubric is going to be used in many of your MBA courses, and while each professor may change some of the weightings or omit certain categories, what you'll notice is that we have consistency across the rubric itself. So what you see here are the first 6 categories. There are a total of 10 categories. What you'll notice though is that what we have here will only look at the qualitative side of things. The other 4 will look at the quantitative side of things. So every single case at a minimum will require each of these. Some of these are pretty self-explanatory. For example, problem identification. Now the thing to remember is that when we're talking about problem identification, it's not common for every case to explicitly state what the problem is. There is a difference between directed and non-directed cases. I myself in the finance course prefer to use non-directed cases, whereas I know some of my peers use directed cases. So if it is a non-directed case, that's going to basically mean that it is your job to determine what the problem is. So again, sometimes it may not be completely clear and it's your job to interpret it. Alternatives. When we're looking at alternatives, we're kind of go outside the box. There will be one answer that may be the most obvious. In fact, some of the cases may actually provide you with a proposed solution. All right. Often, though, that's not necessarily the only or even the best option. You need to assume when you're reading these cases that those that are actually doing the characters, I guess, within the case are just that. They're characters. And you are supposed to be the subject matter expert, and it's your job to determine whether or not the solutions that were presented are even accurate, whether there are alternatives that are better that, of course, you can support. Now, when it comes to the next one, developed position, on this particular line item, we are going to be looking at, all right, so you had some alternatives. Now, what is your position? In other words, what is going to be your action steps? What is going to be the way in which you're going to arrive at the solution? Again, this is going to range because you may be using this for a statement analysis. You may be using this for corporate governance, management. So then the next one, evaluating quality of the evidence. Now, do you identify, assess, and analyze what's provided? So a lot of the times, you're going to have only so much information provided to you within the case itself. Maybe a balance sheet, maybe an income statement. Now, what you need to understand is that you are expected to not only evaluate the quality of the evidence presented, but it's also your job to go outside of the case. The case will not have all of the information you need. You may need to go look up an annual report. In other words, to develop your position even better. Now, broad business analysis. When you're looking at this one, think of it from like a top-down approach. So for example, if you're looking at a single firm, you need to look at the other players in the industry. So maybe you're going to look more broadly at the macro level. What's going on with the economy at that point in time? What's going on with the industry at that point in time? What's going on with the direct peer competitors at that time? So when we're looking at broad business analysis, we're starting, external big and just kind of going until we finally get into like the internal. Okay. Now, in a moment, I'm going to kind of get into some examples of where we can take the broad business analysis because students tend to they see broad business analysis and more often than not, they're jumping to SWOT analysis. And there are other options. I'm just going to provide a few in a moment here. Okay, and then finally, reasoned and logical conclusion. What we're looking at here is given the problem you identified, the alternatives that you ran through, then you develop your position, you did your whole analysis, your broad business analysis to help support your position. Remember, this is all one big project, and usually you are the subject matter expert. Maybe you're the board of directors, maybe you're an analyst, whatever it is, whatever role you're playing in this particular case. When you're coming up with your conclusion, your job is to kind of draw this all together. Why did you arrive here? Was it logical? Now, are there any outside potential factors or implications that will come as a result of this? In other words, are there any consequences as a result of your actions? And those would need to be addressed as well. Now, one thing to note, you are not fortune tellers. So while you can, and I encourage, and all of us will, we encourage you to look outside the case to find additional information. you cannot simply look to say, oh, what happened in the real world after that particular instance happened? Because often the cases we use are actual businesses or problems that were presented. So again, we're not fortune tellers. We can look, find additional resources, but it's not our job just to report what happened. It's our job to actually determine whether or not, given the point in time of the case, where they needed to go. So those are, again, for the qualitative. Now, quickly, when we're doing the broad business analysis, I'm not going to go over these in detail, but there are a handful that you guys should be at least familiar with. And not in all instances is a SWOT analysis ideal. One of the benefits of the SWOT, which is probably the one you're most familiar with, is that it does have both internal and external components to it, right? We have the strengths and weaknesses, and that's, obviously the internal. We've got external components as well. But the idea here, though, is this is not always going to be the best idea. So, for example, this may not be a particular one I would use if I was most concerned with competition in the marketplace. This may not be what I would use if I were contemplating a merger acquisition. Now, again, it changes. Each case will be different, and that's kind of the point here, is that we cannot just jump to SWOT analysis, broad business. The next one, Porter's five forces. This one actually does look at the competitive nature of a particular industry market, direct competitors, and the like. So if we were examining a case that actually had to look at competition within a market, then this would be much more superior than some of the other options because it directly addresses competition. Okay, so again, this would be that option. Some other ones that you may not be as familiar with, these are two variations. So on the left, you've got pest, political, economic, sociocultural, technological. And what you'll notice is that when we're looking at these, you're much more external. Remember I mentioned before you have internal versus external. SWOT had some internal and external, but these definitely going to be focused more on the broader. Now, if a particular firm was looking at going abroad, right? Maybe in some of your cases they'll say, hey, I want to open up a branch or do something for a different market, all right, in a different country, in Italy or something. Well, all of a sudden, this becomes very important because we have a lot more that is external. And then again, pestle is just a variation or an extension of pest as well. So now the next one is VRIO, VRIO. And again, the idea with this one, this is definitely going to be internal. And what this is really looking at is, do we have a competitive advantage? So this would obviously be looking at, do I have a product? Do I have a service that fits these four parameters? And if I do, then obviously I have a potential sustained competitive advantage over something. Of course, I could also have parity, right? And you'll see that on here too, and there's some readings associated with it as well. But you may have parity, which means you may not have the ability to maintain a competitive advantage or even obtain one. So that's the idea with the VRIO or VRIO. And again, this is really going to be internal. So we were looking at, going abroad, then this may not be the first one I go to. All right, these are just a handful of the options out there. My only goal in presenting even just these was to get you away from focusing only on SWOT and to understand that there are several different ones. Some are internal, some are external, some are external but micro, some are external but macro. And each of them will serve a different purpose. And there is generally not a one size fits all. Each case will generally dictate what is required. And this section here is the quantitative portion. So the first six sections or first line items I showed you will basically be for every case, because every case needs broad business analysis, needs problem identification, alternative solutions. All of them need that. However, some of the cases, for example, I do a case in corporate governance. That particular case does not require really any quantitative or computational work. Rather, it's all on corporate governance and basically how to optimize the board of directors. And in that instance, I would omit these four line items from the rubric and instead only use the first six. Now, when we're looking at even these quant ones or these quantitative options, they will differ depending upon what we're looking at. For example, if we're doing a statement analysis, then what are we going to be looking for, right? If we look at that first one, quantitative selection, you needed to analyze a firm. Did you do a vertical common size statement and a horizontal common size statement analysis? Did you do ratio analysis? Did you do what type of ratios did you analyze? So that is just broadly speaking what you're looking at. That goes capital budgeting as an example, or a merger and acquisition. Did you use APV model? So the selection of the procedure. Did you understand what was being asked of you and ask or attempt to utilize the correct mathematical procedures? Quantitative analysis. With this, we're looking to see whether or not you have accurately computed whatever you intended to do. So, for example, if you tell me that you believe that you wanted to value a particular firm using the APV model, and you may have chosen the right option, but it is clear from your outputs or from your computations that it was not performed accurately, or for capital budgeting, that it was not performed accurately. That is where this line item is going to come into play. Quantitative interpretation, you have an output. So we'll use a simple one, right? Net present value. You come up with a net present value for a capital budgeting project, and it turns out to be positive, right? So in the simplest step, I would expect you to understand that, oh, it's positive, therefore it's wealth creating, therefore that would be a project that I would actually be able to undertake. So did you interpret the outputs accurately? Another example, some of the capital budgeting outputs will be in the form of percents, some are in dollars, some are in the form of a ratio, right? So did you understand or even produce the outputs in the correct way, or did you make a percent, a dollar, and the like, because you really didn't understand what the output was telling you? And then finally, the quantitative application. So that's where we say, okay, I performed the correct analysis and capital budgeting. I was able to interpret it correctly, and now I'm going to utilize that in order to make a decision. It's kind of the three steps there. Now, this whole section may be omitted in a qualitative case. Similarly, this section may be edited as far as point values. So for example, if the case is simplified from a quant perspective, in other words, really just not a whole lot to do, then you may still see these line items, but the weight of them may be much lower. That's going to be the discretion of every case professor and the like, but just understand that these 10 categories, 6 and then these 4, they're not necessarily going to be equally weighted, and they may not all be used, but the purpose here is just to give you a general understanding of the rubric. Finally, what you'll see here are the references, and this is just, I only gave you a handful of them, but I thought that these were pretty solid references as far as understanding these 5 at least, of understanding when to use them, kind of what their purpose is. And the goal here is really to make sure that you are using the correct tool at the correct time. All right, that's the end of this video. I hope you guys found that valuable.